When looking at maps of Europe throughout the Middle Ages and early modern period, history lovers often cannot help but notice the incomprehensible mess at its centre. The very definition of border gore and the bane of cartographers, the Holy Roman Empire. It has been a target of jokes ever since the time of Voltaire, and it remains one today. The Holy Roman Empire is a historical outlier. For centuries, it was a remnant of medieval feudalism in a world of centralized sovereign states. In this video, we will explore the reasons why the Holy Roman Empire was as decentralized as it was, trace the story of its fragmentation, and explain its historical reluctance to consolidate. From one confusing mess with powerful consequences to another, we've also got a way for you to handle your personal cybersecurity with ultimate ease with a deal from our sponsor, Aura. Aura's the all-round digital security service that takes all the different problems circling you in the digital age and seals them away. First off, they'll get your data out of the hands of brokers selling it to who knows who every day. Getting too many spam emails or texts, those brokers are behind it all. It's hard to stop them, but Aura can do it for you. Second, when data breaches leak secure info about you, such as the recent massive leak involving social security numbers, Aura will be the first to tell you it's happened and what you need to do to minimize your vulnerability as soon as possible in simple steps. Same deal if someone is pulling credit fraud or using banking services in your name. Aura will also get you covered for antivirus protection, VPN access, password management, and 24/7 access to US-based fraud prevention specialists. That's mobile and desktop security made quick and easy once and for all, for a single affordable price. Whether you're bothered about how your data is being used against you right now, or want security against worst-case scenarios, Aura simply gives you everything you need, and is first to help if something goes wrong. See what Aura can find out about your digital security for free. Go to aura.com/kings to sign up for a 2-week free trial. When Pope Leo III proclaimed Charlemagne Emperor of the Romans, he was dealing with a sovereign monarch, the King of the Franks. Charlemagne presided over a tribe that had been in control of Gaul since the time of King Clovis. The Franks were eager to learn from the Romans. Unlike their Germanic cousins, they converted to the Roman Church, instead of its schismatic rival, the Arian Church. However, in many aspects, the Franks remained the same bunch of rough tribesmen they had been during the time of Attila the Hun. Crucially, they retained the custom of partitioning their property between sons, property which included their kingdoms. In the 7th and 8th centuries, Francia suffered multiple civil wars, and the long-haired descendants of King Clovis even lost their throne to the Carolingians. Charlemagne's descendants followed the same practice as his Merovingian predecessors. His successor, Louis the Pious, waged multiple wars against his own sons. Charlemagne's grandchildren expected their customary shares of the land. As a result, the Frankish realm was divided into 3, West, Middle and East Francia. Middle Francia, the central and most prestigious domain, fractured even further. In West Francia, the Carolingians gave way to the Capetians, and initially the Capetian rule was rather nominal. In East Francia, kings had the most power. Someone had to guard the kingdom's long eastern frontier, so the nobility had a vested interest in a strong, effective monarchy. Ideologically, however, the empire remained united. Its actual territory could be limited, but its mission was universal. There could only be one empire at a time, and only one emperor, just like there was only one god in heaven. The Byzantines and their schismatic icon-worshipping pretenders did not count, obviously. Since the time of Charlemagne, there had always been some form of quote-unquote Roman emperor in the West. First Louis the Pious, then the rulers of Middle Francia, and then the rulers of Italy. Those emperors saw themselves as kings of kings, the rulers of multiple distinct entities. To them, transforming into some kind of unified national monarchy was undesirable. At the time, the might of the monarchs increasingly relied on armoured knights. An average freeman could not afford the equipment necessary to be one. Thus, monarchs granted their men fiefs, pieces of land to govern and enrich themselves in exchange for military service. The holders of those fiefs were the king's vassals, and they could have their own vassals, and they in turn could have their own too. This pyramid, combined with Frankish succession customs, gradually introduced Western Europe to feudalism, with all of its border gore beauty. However, out of all the major kingdoms of medieval Europe, only the Holy Roman Empire retained this fragmented state. An often presented argument for why this was is that, unlike in kingdoms with hereditary monarchies, the Holy Roman Emperor was an elected position. To be elected, the aspiring candidate sold concessions and privileges to the nobles. Thus, the monarchy got weaker and was unable to centralize. To test this argument, let us explore the empire's electoral system. Initially, the empire was not quite an outlier within Europe. The rule in most medieval European kingdoms was not strictly hereditary, and not strictly elective either. Usually it was a mix of the two. In England, royal succession needed the consent of the aristocracy, while the kings of France pushed for hereditary rule by crowning their sons during their own lifetimes. Several Holy Roman emperors tried the same. However, Otto I, Henry IV, and Frederick II all had their successors rebel against them because of this. Still, the monarchy in Germany, while not hereditary on paper, was often hereditary in practice. The nobles generally preferred sons to follow fathers, and emperors usually indicated who should succeed them. When the Ottonian and later Salian dynasties came to power, both claimed endorsement from their predecessors. In the 12th century, Emperor Henry VI tried to reform the German monarchy into a clearly hereditary one. The nobles agreed to recognize his 2-year-old son Frederick as successor, but the reform went no further. Henry VI died prematurely, and the Pope demanded the nobles elect a member of another dynasty. The elections themselves were never transparent and weren't formalized until the 14th century. This was an elite affair, where nobles chose their suzerain unanimously. Dissenters did not participate or left before the results were announced. Veto was not an option. In 2 instances, newly elected kings had to travel to Saxony and gain local approval separately, in what was almost a second election. The dissenters could change their minds for concessions, or simply refuse homage and start a rebellion. Thus, concessions did take place. However, they were not the decisive factor in the imperial succession, and could not keep Germany divided alone. So we will need to explore other arguments too. Since we have mentioned the Pope, we might as well tell the whole story about the Papacy's relationship with the Holy Roman Empire. The Catholic Church, the Pope, and Italian affairs in general were high priorities for the emperors, and therefore for us as well. For the early medieval popes, the emperor was, first and foremost, a protector. Italy was not a safe place, and the Holy See did not feel comfortable with the Arabs, Byzantines, and local Italian rulers on its borders. The Pope needed the emperor to be strong, and usually had the capacity to arrange that. In order to become emperor, one had to travel to Italy and be crowned by the Bishop of Rome, aka the Pope. Thus, the question of who got to be the emperor was ultimately in papal hands. Once the emperor was crowned, however, the Pope could no longer control him. The connection between the emperor and the Pope brought the two into an Intimfiendschaft or bosom enmity. Eventually, this led to the emperor and Pope becoming bitter enemies. The ground for their conflict was Italy, and also the way the empire was governed, specifically the imperial church. Despite bouts of conflict between the empire and the papacy, the Holy Roman emperors found the church useful. They eagerly ceded the royal lands to the bishops, just like they gave land to their vassals. In exchange, the emperors demanded the same from the church as they did their vassals: military service, soldiers, money, and advice. Indeed, many emperors preferred ecclesiastical vassals to secular ones, because they were celibate, would not start a dynasty of their own, and were imperial appointees. In a way, the emperor's habit of favoring clergymen as vassals was an effort to centralize. However, as the papacy grew stronger and its standing and prestige improved, its bureaucracy became more complex and its treasury grew. By the 12th century CE, population growth in Europe brought forth a new wave of monasticism. The popes canonized bishops, selected candidates for sainthood, and approved them. They no longer depended on the empire militarily, for the new Norman kingdom in the south of Italy could provide protection too. Gradually, the papacy emerged as an independent player on the board. Tensions between the papacy and the empire came to a boiling point under Pope Gregory VII. He still saw the emperor as a partner, although a junior one. Pope Gregory compared the church and the state to the soul and body. One was immortal, and the other was profane and perishable. The Pope was superior to both. He was entitled to reject bishops and even kings if they were unfit for office. People who disagreed were, in the eyes of Gregory, agents of the Antichrist. The trigger came when Emperor Henry IV appointed the Archbishop of Milan. Pope Gregory disagreed with the choice and challenged the emperor's right to appoint bishops in principle. The conflict became known as the Investiture Controversy and would last in some form for the next half-century. Things soon got ugly. Emperor Henry convened a synod which renounced obedience to the Pope and demanded his abdication. Pope Gregory excommunicated Henry and released all his subjects from their oaths of loyalty. Faced with opposition in Germany, Henry IV travelled to Canossa. There he awaited, clad in wool, barefoot, freezing, in the open air outside the castle. After the show of humility, the Pope lifted the excommunication. However, the ground for conflict remained. Until the mid-13th century, German monarchs fought nearly constant wars in Italy. Chroniclers and historians have simplified those events into a clash between the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. It was more than a conflict over investiture. In fact, the Investiture Controversy was resolved rather quickly with the Concordat of Worms in 1122. For the emperors, this was a matter of controlling the rich lands of Italy. War is costly, and waging war requires resources. The imperial dynasty that ruled throughout the 12th and 13th centuries, the Staufers, waged war extensively. To secure money, soldiers, and the support of the German nobility, those emperors reworked their relations with their vassals. The process was labelled the Feudalisation of the empire. The fiefs became firmly hereditary, and their holders obtained full control over the cities. Staufers wanted to win, and they had to be generous, resulting in further decentralization of the Holy Roman Imperial realm. In fairness to the Staufers, their reign was not all about decentralization. To wield power, they accumulated wealth. Throughout their reign, much of the Staufers' core region of Swabia was consolidated under their direct rule, turning it into a political and socio-economic centre of the realm. However, the emperors were less successful in Italy, a land of cities, mountains, and malarial swamps that was far harder to bring under centralized rule. Emperor Barbarossa saw a few victories, but after a certain river incident, he was no longer around. Frederick II could defeat individual towns, but not their coalitions. In the end, Italy was where the last of the Staufers met their end. The very last of them did so in Naples on the executioner's block. After the collapse of the Stauffer dynasty, their possessions in Germany were invaded, plundered, and seized by rival families. Swabia lost its economic importance and political weight, and the Holy Roman Empire no longer had any semblance of a centre. Imperial authority was, to put it allegorically, in the gutter. The nobles, who had accumulated power and privileges in the past few centuries, were now the ones in actual control. Once the Staufers were gone, it didn't take the nobles long to formalize it. In 1356, Emperor Charles IV of House Luxembourg signed the Golden Bull. It established the College of Electors, a body consisting of 4 nobles and 3 archbishops. Henceforth, the Holy Roman Empire officially became an electoral monarchy. The electors were recognized as independent rulers, having full regalian rights. Their territories became indivisible. The Golden Bull was basically a Magna Carta of German particularism. By the end of the 14th century, the Holy Roman Empire was well fragmented. However, we still have to explain why it stayed divided for so long and failed to centralize. For that, we should leave the nobles and the priests for now and address the third big component of the empire, its cities. When it came to centralization, cities are natural allies for an aspiring monarch. Cities needed a central force to bring order, reduce uncertainty, impose uniform laws, and cut the internal tariffs. This was the way it worked in France, and German cities were not much different from the French. They resented noble taxation, hated the tolls that every noble lord made sure to collect, and demanded some uniform legal process. Ecclesiastical lords were especially unpopular. Cities like Worms, Cologne, and Strasbourg had all fought against their local archbishop. However, the emperors were unreliable allies. The power they conceded to the nobles included power over cities. For urban dwellers, an alliance with the monarchy was simply a bad idea. Cities had to rely on each other. They united and formed city leagues, including the Swabian, Rhenish, and Lusatian leagues, and of course the Hanseatic League. Together they organized defense, regulated weights, measures, and coinage, and fought for better trade deals. Hansa, in particular, behaved almost like an independent state. It waged foreign policy, engaged in wars, and monopolized trade in the Baltic and the North Seas. Hanseatic cities could even depose kings in Denmark or Sweden, and they didn't need the empire to do it for them. This did not mean that the emperors simply gave up. If anything, the empire was on a rebound. The new dynasty in charge, the House of Habsburg, was here to stay. One might even say the Holy Roman Empire was stronger than ever before. If the Habsburg motto was to be believed, Austria is to rule the whole world. Much was achieved under Emperor Maximilian I. From then on, the elected rulers of Germany did not need to be crowned in Rome as emperors. To better govern this patchwork realm, Maximilian introduced the imperial circles. For the emperor, this was a useful instrument for raising troops and money. Informal noble meetings were replaced with the imperial diet. This was an empire-wide institution that could make binding laws. Maximilian himself was in charge of it. He opened the diet, put forward its agenda, and retained the right of veto. The decisions of the diet had to be approved by the emperor, as well as by 3 colleges, electors, princes, and cities. Under the Habsburg, the empire was a night watchman state. It was a policing institution that could, at least for a while, stop excessive violence in its territory. The lords, princes, or otherwise feudal entities still performed day-to-day government, but the emperor had the power to intervene when necessary. The Habsburgs, however, made the same mistake as the Staufers. They overextended themselves. Maximilian's successor, Charles V, was quite a busy man. Aside from being the Holy Roman Emperor, he was also the King of Castile and Aragon, King of Naples, Sardinia and Sicily, Lord of the Netherlands, Duke of Burgundy, and the master of the Spanish colonial empire. Charles V was not the ruler of the world, but he came closer to that title than most. Charles ruled the empire for 40 years. Most of that time was spent fighting wars with France, the Ottomans, and their allies in North Africa. According to his own account, he had been to Germany 9 times, to Spain 6 times, and to Italy 7. He made 10 journeys to Flanders, 4 to France, 2 to England, and 2 to Africa. He made 8 voyages to the Mediterranean and 3 to the Spanish seas. Although this was an impressive travel record, it was not a sign of effective administration. Charles's home front didn't make his job easier. A certain Martin Luther was already spreading his views throughout Germany, and he was not alone in this regard. Although Charles did win a war against the Protestants, winning peace was beyond his abilities. Faced with Protestant stubbornness, French opposition, desertion of his allies, and overall external pressure, Charles V abdicated. Not long after, the Holy Roman Empire found itself in the 30 Years' War. Sparked by religious divides, it became an international affair, and it was mostly waged on German soil. Of the empire's 5 million population, about 1 million became casualties. Invading armies plundered and terrorized the lands they were moving through. Water sources were left contaminated. Cities were shelled by artillery fire. The emperor's core territory, Lower Austria, lost about 25% of its population. The Habsburgs were exhausted. Prague had fallen, the Swedes were threatening Vienna, and Bavaria was overrun by the French. 4/5 of the empire's strongholds were in the enemy's hands. The only positive was that France and Sweden didn't trust each other. In 1648, in Westphalia, Austria did get a peace deal and remained a great power. For the empire, however, this was a definitive end to any attempts at consolidation. Europe after the Peace of Westphalia was a different place. It was a continent of sovereign states with defined territory. In this world, the Holy Roman Empire was truly an anomaly which defied categorization. It had an emperor who, on paper, was the supreme ruler, but it was also a confederation of equals. Its lords claimed to be sovereign rulers, although the Habsburgs disagreed. Austria still mattered and was a champion of the empire's smallest entities. To summarize, it was a mess. In 1806, the last Holy Roman Emperor, Francis II, declared the empire dissolved. By that time it was viewed as an anachronism, as something abnormal and freakish. Once Napoleon was defeated, the great powers of the time decided not to restore it. The empire's 1,000-year-long story ended. It was a victim of its own ambition, a textbook example of overextension. Obsessed with a global mission, its rulers failed to keep their allegorical backyard in order. The empire certainly left its mark on history, for better or for worse. We always have more stories to tell, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Recently, we've started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.